All right, let's discuss this further now and speak to journalist and author Hopewell Chino'no, who is joining us live now. Hopewell, thank you so much for your time. You've been very vocal about some of the issues that we've seen in the country. And just let's start with these, the developments around these sanctions. And I'm borrowing from what U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken saying that these new measures were part of a stronger, more targeted sanctions policy on Zimbabwe, as he voiced some of the concerns over what he calls serious cases of corruption and human rights abuse. Let's talk about how the impact now with this new, pack of sanctions is likely to have in contrast with what we saw before.
Thank you very much for having me. I don't think that there will be much change in regards to how these people that have been sanctioned, including the president, the vice president, the defense minister, and the first lady, I don't think the behavior that they're being sanctioned for is going to change. We have seen over the past 23 years and even beyond the abuse of state institutions, the beating up of citizens, the beating up of opposition supporters, the killing of opposition supporters, which has been happening as recent as the last election, which was in August 2023. So I don't think that there's going to be very much in terms of the change that the United States government is seeking from the Zimbabwean government. But what is important is that the broader sanctions that were targeted at institutions, some of them that were part of the state, like, for instance, the mining arm of the government that have been removed, will now make it easier for those that are calling for change to make their argument without being told that Zimbabwe is failing because of sanctions. These sanctions are now tightened. They are specific in terms of the people that have been sanctioned, 11. In the past, there were hundreds of people that were sanctioned, and it created a lot of noise, not just in Zimbabwe, but across Africa. And also the entities that have been sanctioned, the companies that have been sanctioned, are not government companies. These are companies that are owned by individuals that have been put on this sanctions list. But in terms of change, time will tell, but I doubt very much that there's going to be any change of behavior in terms of human rights, in terms of corruption. Zimbabwe suffers a lot from corruption. $150 million US worth of gold is lost through sabotage of smuggling across the borders and into Dubai every month. Those are billions of dollars that are being sifted out of the country, and yet hospitals do not have basic medications like paracetamol. 75% of women who give birth at Musina Hospital in South Africa's Limpopo province are Zimbabwean, because public hospitals are not working, and this is because of the corruption. So the United States of government is correct in the sense that in regards to the fact that the corruption is a main driver of the problems that are taking place in Zimbabwe. And in order to underpin corruption, there are human rights abuses, but I doubt that sanctions will be able to deal with this.
I suppose then, listening to what you say, it's of little comfort then as the US is now vowing to support ordinary Zimbabweans?
I think the US has always supported ordinary Zimbabweans. What has been pronounced more has been the propaganda of the Zimbabwean government explaining its ineffectiveness or failure to deliver public goods, failure to make sure that public institutions are working. Zimbabweans don't have clean drinking water in their homes in urban areas as we speak, across the whole country. Zimbabweans are driving their cars on potholed roads, and yet they're paying taxes, 3-4 taxes for owning a car. 95% of Zimbabwe's potential job workforce is out of employment because investors are not coming to Zimbabwe because of corrupt rule, because of how state institutions have been abused, because of how the judiciary has been captured by the ruling elites in ZANU-PF. So all these things combined, they create the crisis that we have in Zimbabwe, which is political, but manifests itself through economics. The international community has always supported Zimbabwe, even during the previous sanctions regime. Most of our people in poor areas are fed by the international community, whether it's the United Nations or the United States or Europe. Food goes all the time into poor communities from the international community.
And Hopewell, you know, yesterday a colleague of mine, Onati, was in conversation with Rutendo Matinyarare, who was saying that for, you know, how he responds to this latest wave of sanctions is that this is a way for America to save face. You know, the US's hand was forced when it comes to making some of these concessions. And I wonder, what is your take on that look at these developments?
Well, Matinyarare speaks as a propagandist for the for those that are pro-ZANU-PF, surrogates of ZANU-PF rule. The fact of the matter is that the country's president is on a sanctions list. The country's vice president is on a sanctions list. The country's defense minister is on a sanctions list. The country's first lady is on a sanctions list. And they've been sanctioned, according to the American government, for corruption and abuse of human rights. So that is a huge indictment on the country, and it gives a country a very bad name. Investors start to worry because they don't want the contagion effect of going with their monies into a country where the president himself cannot transact or open a bank account anywhere in the world, except in Zimbabwe, because these sanctions are not just specific to America. If any of the people that have been sanctioned go to Lesotho today or to Swaziland and they try to open a bank account, that bank will refuse to do so because, as we all know, most of the monies that travel around the world are cleared in New York, in America, and these banks do not want to be punished or penalized for doing business with someone who is on the sanctions list. So it's an embarrassment to have our head of state and senior colleagues in government being on a sanctions list. But I hope that, the president and the people that have been sanctioned will see it fit to do what is right in order for the country to move forward, because Zimbabwe is now in a very terrible state economically. We've got the highest inflation in the world. The Zimbabwean dollar has lost 96% of its buying power in the past 12 months, and citizens are suffering.
All right. Thank you very much, Hopewell. And let's see then what happens in the coming days and what are some of the responses that we continue to see in this particular regard. That was journalist and author Hopewell Chino'no, as we look at now these fresh sanctions that have been meted out against, on President Emmerson Mnangagwa, his wife, and some of the senior officials there in government in Zimbabwe. There's been quite a varying number of responses on this particular development.